Welcome to No Clip, the podcast that's like a book club for people who don't think that books reward them enough for being good at them. I'm Chad Rutherford.
And I'm Andy Kinnick.
And today, we're going to be talking about Elden Ring Shadows of the Erdtree DLC, which was developed by From Software, published by Bandai Namco Entertainment, and was released in 2024 on the PlayStation 4, PlayStation 5, Windows, Xbox One, and the Xbox Series X and S.
But first, if you can give us a like or a rating, it would be greatly appreciated.
Shadows of the Erdtree is finally here, everybody. We're in a weird spot with this. This is the Elden Ring DLC, a game that I will forever call Dark Souls because that's just how I speak now. Dark Souls is a proper noun, a regular noun, an adjective, and a verb to me. And this is like a weird time, I think, because like the game came out about a month ago at this point, and at the date of recording. And so it is still new, and a lot of people are still playing it, but like the deluge of shit that people have been talking about has already sort of come and gone. So it's weird to think about where to start with this. And it was weird to think about how to start with this yesterday before the recording got lost.
Yeah. But I crazily enough, we've been doing this for almost 10 years. I think that's the first episode we ever lost. So
it really is impressive that we managed to make it that long.
It's lost in the Shadow Realm now, along with Mikola and
exactly
all the NPCs who lay. God, what's it even called? I can't remember what the name of the Shadow something.
I've been calling it the Shadow Realm, though I realized that is like not probably it. It's either that or like the Shadow Lands.
Yeah, we'll go with that. That sounds right.
Yeah, the game takes place in like the Elden Ring equivalent of the afterlife, which is much like everything in a Miyazaki production. TM is impossible to discern from whatever else it could be.
Right. Yeah, but I guess the discourse is something interesting to jump in on, I think, because I don't seek out discourse on these games that much, but like the stuff that I did hear about this, I was like surprised by. Like I feel like the DLC for these games has always been the hardest part. Like and I know Elden Ring sold a lot better than the previous games in the series, but like, I don't know. I'm still surprised people were complaining about how hard it was.
Yeah, I think are just exactly correct there. In that the reason that there was so much talk about this and why it became such a big topic is, I think, because there are a lot more people who are not seasoned within the series. And I don't say that to be gatekeepy. It's more just like, I don't know if people knew that the trend was that when the DLC came out, the difficulty amped up. Mm-hmm. And I think it's compounded by the location of the DLC within the game, because it is all the way at the end of the game, which, as somebody who's coming back to the game, potentially somebody who hasn't played it in 2 years, you're coming in with a character that has already beaten the majority of it, and are going in fresh to something that is post-end game content, and has I would say, very slightly unintuitive leveling system in the Scadu tree fragments. Mm-hmm. To make it like, I think there were a lot of people who didn't expect it to be as hard as it was, also were out of practice, and also didn't know how to improve their character. And I think that led to where the discussion like got to.
Yeah. It does feel like they really leaned hard into balancing it around people having level 170 plus characters. In the DLC, yeah. So yeah, like, there's no like if you started a new character and got to like level 60 or whatever and get like to fight Moog and then go into the DLC, it's gonna be pretty brutal for you.
I do have to wonder, because I've given like a little bit of thought to this, but it hasn't been the focus of sort of my internalization of this game. It's just something that sort of like came up once. I thought about it a little bit and then kind of dropped it. I wonder if you have thoughts on it. The way that the game handles that, the fact that it expects the player to be basically anywhere from level 100 to level like 400, and wants to create something that is still like playable for any character who goes in. They implemented this system that I alluded to earlier, in the Scotty Tree fragments and levels, as well as the revered Spirit Ash levels, which are essentially an upgrade system where you find materials and then burn them at the bonfire to increase your yeah, that's just very much a Dark Souls phrase that doesn't apply here at all. You spend them in the menu at a grace. Sounds a lot more boring. In order to increase the damage you deal and the amount of damage you take, reduce that one. But it's only effective in the DLC. And my thought on that was essentially like, this is a separate leveling system so that they were able to push the numbers higher on stuff in order to contend with people who have a higher level character without unbalancing the main game. Because if they just like move the soft caps, say like it at like now at 99 strength, you get a huge increase, whereas you wouldn't before. That would make it so that if you did the DLC and then went back to do like the final boss, you wouldn't just one shot it with a wooden club. And in the end, like it apparently it ended up being more confusing for some people. I have gripes about the system also. Like I finished the DLC at Scatter Tree level 17. And which means that I missed like somewhere around 6 of the fragments. Whereas like with the Estus, which isn't called Estus, the flask of cerulean tears, you can get way more golden seeds than you need to upgrade that to max level. But yeah, I don't know if you had any thoughts on that at all. That's kind of just the bare facts of it.
Yeah, I think it. I kind of like the system. Like I found a Skydo Tree fragment like right away, so like it wasn't like a thing that I felt like confused about, because it could just give you a pop up when you pick the first one up. You know, I think it works well for like what they're trying to do. Like it lets them like amp up the difficulty of the DLC without like as you said, like throwing out the balance of the main game. And I think past games could kind of be that way. Like if you go in to the DLC in like Dark Souls 1, when you come back, like Gwyn is not nearly as imposing as he would have been otherwise. But yeah, I don't know. I feel like the game is big enough in scale that it kind of needed something to like reset the difficulty curve. So yeah, I don't have strong feelings about it. It worked well enough for me. Of a funny unintended side effect it had though is I just remember picking up those first 2 fragments, and the one for the Spirit Ashes like mentioned that it buffed the Spirit Ashes in the DLC, and I just remember being like, oh my god, like did they make the game that much harder? Because I feel like one complaint most people had with the base game was that Spirit Ashes were way too overpowered, and if it's just like if they doubled down and made them even better, like the DLC must be like ludicrously difficult.
Which, I think that there is an argument to say that it kind of is. Like, in comparison to most of the base game, like, you aren't really ever put into a spot in the DLC that is, like, a no-effort chill zone. Like, you're pretty much always in horrible danger. And that is by design. Like, the whole area is, I mean, obviously not the entire open world, but anytime that you're in a dungeon, all of the bosses are reasonably challenging, with the exception of like a couple of weird, like catacomb style bosses, which is something we didn't talk about yesterday and should be put on the list.
Yeah. We were getting there.
Yeah. But the fact that it is like a that they buffed the spirit ashes, I think makes a lot of sense because Elden Ring is a game that does a lot to mitigate its own difficulty, given just tools in the game. So it was cool for me. The biggest thing was like the fact that they gave Torrent more HP and stuff is very relevant given the other stuff that's in the game that does actually, like, you're gonna be running around on Torrent a lot because the DLC contains an open world segment, but the enemies also have to be buffed to the point where it would just be really awkward if you were being like knocked on your ass constantly,
Yeah.
by random field enemies. So it is weird to me that they buffed the Spirit Ashes as a whole, but I think in context makes sense and and doubly so for Torrent. So
Yeah. I agree that it makes sense to do. It just really like surprised me when I was met with that right off the bat. It made me go into the first boss and summon the Mimic tier because I was expecting it to be ludicrously hard, and then I just beat it on the first try. I was like, oh, okay.
Right, which is something that we will get back to.
Yeah. Little foreshadowing for later.
Yeah, but I think that kind of covers it as far as like the leveling system goes. It is a scavenger hunt. It's going to be weird going back to the DLC and having to sort of collect everything again. It's sort of a slow process, but the Elden Ring is a game that also has a slow start, even if you're very sort of familiar with the game. So I can't say too much about it on that front. Like, I think the amount that it adds is kind of negligible given the length of the game for most people. Obviously, the people in the upper echelon are going to be very annoyed, but like that ain't me, so I don't have a strong feeling on it. But one of the things that I know I brought up before is the placement of the DLC, the fact that it is after Moog, and this was a real sticking point for me. As far as like the overall, like the grand scheme of the DLC, I do really like it. One of the things that's going to bum me out in future as I continue, because I made a character specifically for the DLC a month before it came out and ran it up to where it needed to be. And if I go to play the game again, I'm not going to have that opportunity again. I'll have to create a new character from scratch. The fact that it is so far the DLC is so far into the game, I don't like that you aren't able to run and grab the like cool, unique equipment and bring it into the main game without having to beat Moog, who is like, in context, like gives the third of all of the base game bosses, is third place as far as the number of runes you receive from killing him. Like, the game treats Moog as the third hardest boss. And so it's weird to think about like trying to rush Moog in order to get a weapon to bring back to play the base game with. And that bums me out a little bit because I'm not that good to be able to just beat him at level 1.
Yeah. I feel like that is a really interesting point that I hadn't considered because I'm a very different type of player that doesn't use anywhere near as a wide variety of weapons as you'd like to usually. But yeah, because to me, it kind of feels like the designers really of the game didn't think about it that way. Like, this really feels like it's supposed to be post-game content, like your more typical expansion. And yeah, it really feels like they didn't give any thought to the fact that some players might want to take the DLC equipment back to the main game. But yeah, it just really feels like they leaned into it being a post-game, your level, like 275 when you go into here, and you have like no use to bring any of it back to the main game or anything.
Right. Yeah, I don't know. It's just as I do with everything that exists, I compared it to Bloodborne and the old Hunters DLC, which is something you can access after essentially the second boss of the game. Like, you only have to beat Gascoigne before you can fight Amelia, and then after beating Amelia, you can enter the DLC. Is that even true? Do you even have to beat Amelia? I honestly don't know.
Probably.
Yeah, I think killing her spawns the eye, and then you take the eye. This isn't the Bloodborne podcast yet. Uh, sign my change.org petition to have us only talk about Bloodborne for the rest of eternity. It's like very early, and it means that you can make builds around the weapons. I will grant that Elden Ring, the game, has like 6,000 weapons in it, and Bloodborne has like 25. So it's a lot. Like, if you wanted to build around a weapon, there are a lot more options in Elden Ring than there are in Bloodborne. And so having them more easily available, I think, is better in that game just generally. But also, like, in this game, you only have to beat the game. You only have to fight 4 bosses. It's Mesmer, Ramina, the NPC fight, which is debatably a boss fight, and the final boss. And so you actually have access to everything that's on the ground. Anything that isn't a boss weapon, you can go in and get without having to fight any bosses. So you can just run through and get it, which to me feels like it's designed in a way to allow you to do this. Except you do have to beat Moog.
Right.
So that's my one pushback, I would say.
Yeah, no, I think it's an interesting point because, as I said, I wouldn't have considered it myself. And, like, yeah, like it feels like kind of almost like an oversight that, like, because there is precedent for it. And I do think it's interesting to allow the player base to get access to the DLC early if they've beaten it before. I feel like it could have been cool because, like, the DLCs for all of these games have been towards the end for the most part. Yeah. Because they come out after the game has been out for a year plus. But it could have been cool if they maybe like placed the DLC as like a mid-game thing, or like, I don't know exactly what cool stuff you could have done with that, but like it could have been interesting to like introduce it in a different way, because like I think the fact that it's an open world game and is so much longer and bigger in scope, they could have maybe considered that as an option, and it might have been cool.
Yeah, I think having an area, this is like to me is like the holy grail of expansion type DLCs, is where you have a DLC that integrates itself within the main game, where you can go in and out of the DLC, but it's understandably unappealing to developers because, one, it's a lot more balancing, whereas this, they could just say, make it hard, and everyone said, okay, we'll do that. How much damage should that do? Put an extra 0 on the end of it. And then, like, in addition to that, when you've beaten the game, it's less appealing to go back to clear out easy content that is made for mid game. So there is like a shade of that, but also it isn't. And I'm gonna make comments later in the episode about how I think that more things in this game should be designed for people who are only going to play the game one time. But famously, this is a series that people play a lot of times.
Right.
So having it be like slightly unsatisfying if you're playing on a character that is just done with the game already is like almost a worthy sacrifice, even if that is a bit hypocritical with how I'm going to describe some of the other things. So, yeah, I don't know. That's the placement of the DLC bit that I have.
Yeah.
I still like where it is because of what they were able to get away with, but I do wish that it was easier to access, even if you couldn't beat anything. So I could pick up a cool weapon.
Yeah. No, and I'm right there with you with like kind of wishing that the DLCs were more seamlessly integrated and you didn't warp to them. Like I feel like you could attach it to the existing world with a path and put it behind a big locked door or something. I always wish that they would do that, but they never have.
Yeah, it's a little sad. Though this one does take place in the afterlife, so it'd be a little bit harder. But,
yeah.
They didn't have to
like
make it take place in the afterlife.
You could have some kind of like ethereal archway you walk through or something. Why not?
I do love an ethereal archway, for what it's worth. That would be cool. Just love to see it. Agreed, though. I think we sort of covered it. But the reason that I want to be able to access the DLC early is because the DLC in this game added a bunch of cool new weapons. Famously, among just me and probably nobody else in the world, every time I play Elden Ring, I for some reason end up with a greatsword. I don't know how it happens. They've just made a greatsword that works super good for every build. And builds have like 3 for some reason. And so I really enjoy the greatsword playstyle, but also specifically I would love to do something. It's just anything else, because all of the movesets are effectively the same. And so I really like that they had sort of an emphasis in this on creating new weapon types. And some stranger variations on weapons like the Smith script weapons that all have throwing abilities. So yeah, I do know this, unfortunately, so the question is less exciting this time around, but did you play around with or try any of the new weapon types in the DLC?
Not as much as I probably should have, but I did try a couple of them. I tried the thrusty sword spear thing that's used by the boss from Twilight Princess,
General Gaius.
Yeah, General Gaius. General Porkums from Twilight Princess. But yeah, his
Jack
weapon
Porkins from Star Wars.
yeah, also portrayed by him. Little known trivia fact there. But yeah, I tried that weapon, leveled it up all the way. I didn't hate it, but I didn't like love it. But the one I ended up using was the Great Sword of Solitude, I think it's called, from the boss that ruined everybody's life right at the beginning of the DLC. He was like in a little side dungeon thing. Fought him a bunch of times and finally managed to beat him, and then slowly put enough points into endurance to use all of his equipment. But started using that sword right away. So yeah, I ended up being the one using the great sword this time around.
That's true. I did when I finished the game. I immediately leveled up the lizard greatsword, because it's a greatsword that is a lizard and it shoots a little tongue out of it on the R2s. So I didn't escape it at all. But they also put in the perfect weapon for me into the game, so that's their fault, really. They should have known that I would relapse.
Yeah.
I mean, it shoots a little tongue, Andy. It's so cute. But I did I did try a lot of stuff in the DLC. I ended up maxing out about 7 weapons. One of the Smith script weapons, the Great Hammer, which does just sort of play like a Great Hammer, but being able to throw it actually makes it really cool in the overworld, because you have a ranged option, and both of us played characters that had no magic at all.
Yeah, I really meant to try those out and then just completely forgot.
Yeah, there seems like there's a lot of cool shit in there for people who have like int and arcane and faith scaling, but this time around that wasn't me. No finger sorceries, which is just a combination of words that gets me all kind of excited.
Yeah. Don't look that up on Urban Dictionary, though.
Yeah, that one's not so good. But I tried, I hate katanas in the main game. The Great Katana ended up being my favorite weapon class that was added. I always had a perfume bottle just so I could kill slimes. Traditionally one of my least favorite enemy types in all From Software games. Being able to just kill them fast is very satisfying.
Yeah, they made me actually remember to use my Ash of War because the wind beam or whatever on the Solitude Greatsword worked pretty well against those. So
yeah, if I never ever used Ashes of War. I didn't use weapon skills in Dark Souls 3 really at all either. So I'm going to probably say some bosses were real hard and that I could have made easier by using the full availability of tools that the game provided for me. Shut up. Only in a few cases am I going to levy the difficulty of a boss as a criticism. If I'm not doing that, and me using a laser beam out of a sword or something would have made it easier. Just accept that I'm stupid and stubborn. So that's just a little note for for the listeners going forward.
Yeah. I know. Like, I also am not a big Ash of War user. And I remember, like, anytime I would use the Mimic tier, it would really, like, bring that into relief for me. Because the Mimic tier likes to, like, immediately start spamming it. So
Yep.
I was like, oh, yeah. I never remember to do that.
And that's always like, to me, that's always such an irritation. Like, I swapped Ashes of War around, not Ashes of War. I did swap Ashes of War around like twice so that I could change my infusions. But I swapped my Spirit Ashes around a lot during this playthrough, just to sort of try some of the new things that existed. But whenever I would use Mimics here, I hated so much whatever Ash of War I stuck on the weapon. Because most of the time it wasn't like a strategic choice. It was like, this weapon takes this Ash of War and allows me to put a keen or a quality infusion on the weapon. And would do that, and then like fucking the Mimic tier immediately spawns and then just never attacks the boss and just sits there and like does the roar move for 30 minutes. It's it makes the Mimic tier do very dumb things a lot of the time.
Yeah. Like, I felt like almost like conditioned by like my weapon choices in the main game because I didn't have Ashes of Wars that I liked. And I know you can swap them, but like I can't be fucked to do that. So yeah, like I remember I used like Godfrey's axe for a while, and it's Ash of War just like a weird stomp that's like not that great. So like, but like anytime I'd use the Mimic tier, he would start the battle by doing like a big war stomp. So
Yeah,
at least that was,
it has like a voice
cool.
line too.
Yeah, he like yells.
Is it? Ah!
Yeah. So at least that was cool.
Though also notably, that's one that you can't change. So
Yeah, that's true.
You didn't fuck up on that one.
But back on the subject of the new weapons, the one that I really wanted to try was is it called a light greatsword or an ultra light great? I don't remember what it's called.
Just light greatsword. There's
yeah.
3 of them in the game.
Yeah, like those specifically the one called Milady, I thought seemed pretty cool.
Yeah, Milady was the only one of them that I could use because the other ones required other scalings, which is just cruelty to me.
Right.
I could not use any boss weapons, sadly, and Verlana's were like split strength, dex, int, faith, which was an all too common split of required stats in this DLC for me.
Yeah.
But yeah, the light greatsword is super super fun.
Yeah. One thing that just occurred to me that I hadn't thought of before, that this conversation brought up is like it leveling up, having to like leave the DLC to go to the hub to level up your equipment felt really strange. Like I found myself thinking they should have added a new hub for the DLC.
Yes, 100%, forever yes.
Yeah, it feels so weird to warp back to what is it even called?
The round table hold.
Yeah, round table hold, and to be on fire or smoldering or whatever like it is, and you have really sad Roderica and the blacksmith.
Hugh? Question mark?
Yeah, or something like that. Yeah, and they're just they're the only 2 there. It's really
it
strange.
sucks so bad.
Yeah.
And the fact that it was on fire, I think, was the thing that killed it for me. Like, I don't want to go back to a burning building to interact with menus. It stripped like everything that's cool about the round table hold is still cool when you're playing the base game, but when the only use that it has is to do like paperwork, you're just, oh, I got a new weapon, I have to go upgrade it. I have to buy stuff from the Twin Maiden husks. Like it makes it so, it's like it divorces it from its context and just makes it like, unnecessarily complicated menu. Just having a hub in the other world, I think, one, makes sense in the context of the story, and also would have made me hate Roundtable Hold less over the course of the DLC.
Yeah. It's even more boring than the actual paperwork in Gideon's office. No, but yeah, it would have made sense, I think, for the little band of NPCs following Mikola to have like a home base that could have been the hub. You know, I feel like it would have slotted in nicely.
I agree. And it bums me out. And not only that, but you and I are not the first people that I have heard talk about it either. Like, going back there just sucks. It's something they should have learned from Bloodborne, where they made you go back. Because I am comparing everything to Bloodborne. This a rare negative. The fact that every time you go to level, you have to go back to the hub. Makes you, especially near the end of the game where it's once again on fire.
Yep.
It just like is a real bummer. And so I feel like this is like, I think, an easily avoidable, very minor mistake.
Yeah.
It's weird to even complain about, considering like how little it matters a bit.
Yeah, it does feel really weird.
Yeah.
I think, yeah. And clunky. It's
I think
definitely
we just
stands
expect more of From Software than other developers.
Yeah, I mean, it's also like the amount of time and money spent on the DLC. I feel like some of it could have went towards making a new hub area, you know? I think it's fair to expect a little more.
But that's pretty much it, I think. There's a lot of weapons I would like to try in future playthroughs. But, you know, I'm going to have to wait until I get to the fucking DLC to use them. So I will just post an update like 2 years from now. Still mad about the DLC, says me.
Yeah, I do.
Like whenever I get around to it.
Yeah, I do feel like I look forward to, or am optimistic for the future of the more interesting, like, kind of ranged options like they introduced in this DLC. I think that's an interesting avenue for weapon types in this series.
Yeah, I agree. I think a lot of them have been sort of confined to the Ash of War space.
Yeah, or just like a bow and arrow.
Yeah, or you have a bow and arrow. But the fact that now there's just like, hey, look, these are weapons that just get thrown all the time. That's cool. They don't cost resources to use. They can just be, and they aren't like so strong, right? Like you are able to just use them like a normal weapon with an additional option. Making use of the fact that this game inexplicably, and I say inexplicably because even though many games in the franchise have had this, you just have 3 weapon slots in your right and left hands in this game. Which is just never practical given the amount of weight that weapons have. But hey, at least if you do have infinite stamina, you can just load up and be fully kitted at all times with like all of these different options. So hypothetically cool, impractically cool.
I didn't even realize there were 3 slots.
I believe there are.
I thought it was just 2, but
I think it's like
you're more likely, to be correct than I am about that.
Probably true. Though I don't know if I've equipped 3 things. You can equip 3 things in Dark Souls 3, so I assume that you can here as well. You mentioned the little NPC community building a little hub world for you. I assume this is a sick fantasy you have about people creating hub worlds for you to explore.
Yeah.
I would talk a little bit about the NPCs, mostly because I don't know why, but I didn't like them. It wasn't I didn't like them. I didn't care about them.
Yeah, they did feel like a little bit of a weak crop of NPCs to me as well. Was it you say it Theoliae?
That's how I've been pronouncing it.
Yeah.
It sounds crazy, so it's probably wrong.
It's probably the only one that I found interesting.
I would give a shout out to Egon, because he's great and is I love him. However, it's hard to see, he's not, I wouldn't class him with the other NPCs because he is just like, he has a very specific quest. You run into him exactly 2 times.
Is he the one who's just yelling in pain?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, he rules.
That is a classic, like, FromSoft thing. I feel like he's going to be a meme in the community going forward.
Already is, 100%.
Yeah.
People love the I'll riddle your hide with a hail of harpoons.
Right.
And that's why he's great. Like, it's just his voice acting is done in this very over-the-top, silly way. And it's like, From Software has put jokes in games before. I'm not denying that. But overwhelmingly, From Software's games, I would describe their tone as bleak, lonely, unwelcoming,
Isolating.
To have a character that was like written as a joke, because people have made jokes of characters, but he was clearly written to be funny and succeeds at that, is showing sort of the range that they can have if they choose to.
Yeah.
And there are a few other options, like Patches is obviously designed to be humorous in a lot of ways.
There was that guy with the prawns.
There's that guy with the prawns.
Game.
He says America's tits, and everybody loves that.
Yeah.
That is good. And also pretty successful.
Yeah, I mean, Framped is kind of funny.
I think Framped is not intentionally. I mean, when he's like asleep and like he's being like kind of a grumpy old man. Yeah, maybe he was written as a joke. You might be onto something here. I'm not sure.
But anyway, yeah, I take your point though. He is definitely like a different archetype for them.
Yeah. And so yeah, I do like that for him. Good for him.
I'll also give a shout out to the guy who gives you the quest to find the finger ruins.
Oh,
yeah.
Go ahead. Just keep talking.
I like a weird cryptic priestly guy. Classic.
Agreed. Yeah, I think he's got a good. He falls into an archetype that is always fun to see. He's almost, but not quite. He's almost Mikolash esque in the fact that he just kind of like goes on and on about the cosmos and shit that you have no context to understand, and then like you do get the moment of understanding at the end. And also he's just like an insane person.
They would be drinking buddies for sure.
Oh yeah. I also loved him. To tie this in, because we didn't really actually finish it when we talked about it before. I have issues that we'll talk about with a large portion of that guy's quest. But I will say I was so fucking excited about it because like I think I posted this in our Discord with a spoiler tag that was like, I can't believe they're giving us lore on the finger creepers. And I was so there for it. I was so ready for the finger creeper lore. And then the fact that like he has like a whole thing that is largely vacant, difficult to really get much enjoyment out of performing the quest, but everything you get from it is so fucking cool. Like when you kill him, spoilers, you get his like armor set, which is like a robe and some shit. If you alter
accessories,
the robe plus accessories, $24.99. If you alter the robe, it becomes the robe but open, and there's just like a million fingers coming out of it. The boss is one of my favorites in the DLC. The boss weapons are like fucked up finger shit. He gives you like weird sorceries that make fingers come out of the ground. Like all of the stuff surrounding that quest is so extremely cool to me. So I'll also give him a pass, though. He does just sit in a chair and then you fight him. Like that's the full that's
classic
his whole arc.
From Software.
Yeah. But yeah, when we talk about the NPCs, I think we're largely talking about the cast that includes Leda, Ansbach, Hornsent, Freya, and more.
Right.
And Thiolier. I'll give
Yeah.
him. He gets main cast
Billing.
billing. And they're the ones that did not engage me nearly as much. Like, something about their whole deal, like, just didn't do it. And I think it's a lot because they were introduced so early, and I didn't know how much I was supposed to care about them, and it didn't become clear until late.
Yeah. I almost kind of feel like for me, I speculate that it might be because they're all so closely tied to Mikola, and I feel like Mikola's like storyline was pretty weak as well. Like, given that like so much, like I feel like so much of the main game references Mikola, and this whole DLC is themed around Mikola, and I just feel like they don't end up having that much of a presence in the world, and their quest is kind of like hazy and not that clear, and I don't know. The execution of it just feels weird. I don't know how to describe it, but I didn't find it particularly engaging, and I think that might be part of it.
Yeah, I think that you nailed it with presence. Like, I think Mikola lacks presence in this game. You find the Mikola's crosses, which is like a major upgrade thing. And so this is a design trend that I think is just like, it works and is good design, where when there's a thing that you want to deem as important for your narrative, tying it to something that is important mechanically is a great way of making the player care more about it. The problem is that the Mikola's crosses say things that you don't have any context for. It's like, oh, these represent Mikola's footprint, so Mikola has been here. And then they say, this is my cross. I'm Mikola. I cut off my arm here. And it's like, I don't get it. Like, is that a metaphor? Is that literal in some like strange gods only sense that I don't understand why? There are like elements of it. I know I mentioned when we did this before. There's one in the coffin depths or whatever it's called, in the big hole in the Cerulean coast, where it says like, I've abandoned my capacity for love or something, and they put a spirit there to sort of emphasize the importance of it, because Mikola's thing is like, oh, they treat you with love, and that's their charm, and that charm is like kind of literally just mind control. And so there's like that whole thing, and it's like, I recognized it as being important, but it was difficult for me to make it make sense in the story. It was like, but what does this mean for me? Or is it just sort of like so that I have an understanding of stuff that happens later? And it's all kind of just explained in a single sentence later. Like, they're just like, oh, Mikola had to sacrifice all the stuff in order to become a god. And it's like, oh, or like, you know, whatever fucking extra god level that, because I guess he was Empyrean or something. I don't remember the text exactly.
Yeah.
So yeah, like, in order to become a god, he had to sacrifice his whole body. And to me, it made it like, oh, okay, these are the places. It didn't like, I didn't get excited about it. You're right. It lacks presence.
Yeah. It's like, I think it's, yeah, as you said, it's like these, it's descriptions you do get of Mikola's story are described in like flowery prose that like don't make a, like, you know, very proverb like, that, you know, kind of like go in one ear out the other. And comparing it to something like Gwyn in Dark Souls 1, right? I think it helps like to give your main villains and / characters like these just like simple to understand motivations, and like give them like simple goals. Like, Gwyn's talked about all throughout Dark Souls 1, and it feels like it gives him presence because, like, you know that like Gwyn was like the Lord of Fire. He's like the guy, like essentially like the Zeus of this world. And he got that little inkling of like the future where like humans were going to take over and there was going to be an age of dark, and he just like he disagreed with that so hard that he sacrificed himself to link the fire, to extend his age of fire. Like, he just killed himself because he didn't want to let go of like his world and like his that he created. So like, and you get that. It's like, it's simple to understand, and I feel like when you walk into his boss room, he doesn't need to have any dialogue. Like, you feel like you get Gwyn, right? And like Miquella just doesn't have that. It's like Miquella is like, was like a sickly child that what was he doing with Moog? Why is he dead in an egg?
Yeah.
Why does he have to go to the afterlife? Like, all the details are like fuzzy and like much harder to grasp onto, and I think that's like the difference. I don't know if that's like George R.R. Martin influence. They had more of a backstory, so they made it a little more complex. I don't know.
Yeah, I think there's like a as far as the storytelling goes, like Miquella is a character that in the main game is ambiguous, both for the player and for people in the world, and made me really like the idea of the character. Like, Miquella is like I said, I don't remember. I think it is Empyrean is the word. Basically like one of the demigods that is like marked for potentially like being the Elden Lord ? I don't remember well enough to say exactly, but Miquella had followers with two different personas. So you have Miquella, you have Saint Frina, and we get like literal representations of both of them in the DLC. And I like the idea of a mysterious character behaving mysteriously,
right?
Generally speaking. But I think that when it goes into the DLC and Miquella becomes more of the like, everything that happens in Elden Ring that's important happened 100 years ago, and you are sort of like in a post-apocalypse essentially throughout the main game story. The DLC is much more in the present. Like, you are doing things and Miquella is doing things live and in real action, and you have to essentially like race Miquella to the I forget what they call it, like the divine gate or some shit. And obviously, because it's a video game where they control everything, you fail at doing that, are unable to stop him from ascending to godhood, and then you fight Radahn. But up to that point, like we've just been talking about, you don't get like he doesn't have that much of an impact on the story itself. And I love the Gwyn comparison so much, because when Gwyn shows up and you're on the way, you know that you're fighting Gwyn, and you know when you open the fog gate, I presume with a doorknob. I don't know why I made that hand gesture that nobody's going to be able to see. And Gwyn is on the other side. You already have an understanding of what Gwyn's character is. He's a destroyed man. He's a guy who does not, well, God technically, and like he's almost like lost his mind with this like single thing. And Gwyn is a sad character, and so Gwyn gets to have the Plin Plin plot, right?
One of the best great soundtracks of all time.
It really is. And like the soundtrack of the DLC of Elden Ring is absolutely no slouch. Some of these tracks are some of my favorites, like in From Software's entire catalog. But Miquella is a character who is also sad, to a degree, or like is at the very least, like the fact that you have to kill Miquella is sad. And the boss music has to match the energy of Radahn attacking you 15 times in a second with light clones and calling down pillars of energy from heaven. And it's so different. It like the fact that it's Radahn's fight, but it also caps Miquella's story, ends up putting kind of like a poopy sour note on the end of it.
That is a really good point. Yeah, like the showing back up of Radahn like kind of takes the spotlight. Doesn't kind of. It just does take the spotlight away from Miquella. Yeah, and I think that's a big part of it that I hadn't considered as much. Because and another thing about like when you walk into Gwyn's boss room is like it almost feels like surreal to come face to face with him, to actually see him in the game. Like,
Right.
I feel like, yeah, like seeing Mikola doesn't have the same impact.
Yeah, it really doesn't. And the fact that it's like relegated to phase 2, and also they designed Mikola to look at, like hair.
I kind of like that. I like that
The
Mikola's
design
just a
looks
cape.
great.
Yeah, it's very like Horaloo from the base game, or even more fittingly, I think, like Lothric and Lorien from Dark Souls
Yeah.
3. Because Mikola's kind of similar to Lothric.
Yeah. The Mikola being the backpack, like Lorien is in Dark Souls 3, makes a lot of sense from like the design, like the character design perspective. And yeah, and I thought you were gonna jack my revelation from yesterday,
Oh, no.
which was that I did in fact remember the name of that lion, and it is Siraj. And I was very surprised that I had remembered the name.
Yeah.
And it is, I think, supposed to be a callback to it. Like, it's
Yeah,
a
yeah.
big, muscular man with a flowy, white, ethereal effect on their back. It seems like a deliberate reference in that sense.
Yeah.
But it is like, it's Mikola's fight also, but Mikola just feels like he takes such a backseat to it.
Yeah.
And I think that's why I was disappointed in it. Not that disappointed.
No,
I'm not
no.
going around saying that the story of the DLC is just like shit garbage, but it didn't engage me.
Yeah. It isn't as engaging as it could or should have been, probably. It just, you feel the missed opportunities in it, I think.
Yeah. So unless there was anything that you wanted to jump into specifically, I think that this didn't exactly go extremely positive on these elements of the game. But there are further things to talk about, specifically like anything that you fight or do. So do we want to come back and cover those important things after the break?
Hell yeah.
Hell yeah, heck yes. We don't swear on this podcast. All right. Hey.
What a
Get your
wonderful
head
kind
out of
of
your
day.
ass. We're back. We went in very different directions with that, which is great.
Yeah.
One thing that we didn't go in very different directions on, but also kind of we did, is the characters that we played for the DLC.
Mm-hmm.
As I mentioned before, I had a lot of great sword sort of centric builds, and those were the characters that I had ready to go. But the one that I made specifically for this, one, for a little bit of a difference in kind, but also just because I wanted to play through the game and refamiliarize myself before going into the DLC, was like a dex-centric character that over time, because the DLC gives you an infinite number of runes, evolved into a quality character, which allowed me to use more of the weapons, but was just a martial character. Did not have any intelligence, wisdom. I did at one point respec to just move 4 points into intelligence and wisdom so I could use the Smith script weapons,
Nice.
which have a 11 requirement. But was still like very just low to the ground, hit stuff with things. And so that was kind of my build, and not too dissimilar from the build that you did.
Yeah. So I just took my base game character in, and my base game character was I didn't pick the barbarian starting class, but I essentially played him as one. I used axes only. So I used like a big great axe for a while till I got Godric's axe and then Godfrey's axe, and then dropped that theme in the DLC for a great sword. So I was kind of like, he kind of has like Black Iron Tarkus vibes.
Yeah, I would agree.
Yeah. So
I think
big old Black Knight essentially.
Yeah, I knew from the beginning, like, this is like a thing that like a rallying cry for me, where I'm like, never new game plus, always new character.
Oh yeah.
I want to like make a character that has a theme. My first character in Elden Ring was a character that was named the Cool Pastor, and if the Cool Pastor was not a strength faith build, if I had respect him at any point, that would have been a betrayal
Right.
of who he was.
You got to pick something and stick to it. Yeah.
Yeah, but this character I knew I was going to change immediately upon getting to the DLC because I just didn't know what anything was going to be. And so I wanted to sort of like leave my options open. But even though the character's name was Sam Seer, because I played with 2 Shamsheers for the whole base game and for the start of the DLC. So I did betray him a little bit. I will say, I'm just highlighting my own hypocrisies on this episode of the podcast.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever done one of the DLCs for these games on New Game Plus.
Ooh, I definitely have played Bloodborne DLC on New Game Plus a couple of times.
Yeah.
But I think that might be the only one. I rarely play New Game Plus.
Yeah, I don't. I'm not a New Game Plus guy.
Yeah. But also, if you listen to the podcast, you know that we also don't generally replay things that often. Like, these are kind of an exception to that. So yeah, came with very martial characters, didn't have the mage experience. So what we're about to talk about might not reflect your experience in some ways. Also, and you were the first one to bring it up yesterday, but I will introduce the concept now. We are not people who think that this is like, at this point, I feel like everyone gives this disclaimer, but I do think it is a good disclaimer, so I'm going to give it anyway.
It's useful. Yeah,
we are definitely not people who are like, they're correct and incorrect ways of playing Dark Souls. Like, you can do whatever you want. It cannot possibly affect me in any way that you did something in Dark Souls that I did not. Neither of us give a shit about summoning. We will summon. I specifically will use spirit ashes, but don't use human summons, which might sound like a deliberate thing I do to challenge myself, but in reality, I think it makes it harder when there are human people there.
And I will specifically summon you.
That's true. I do. That's the horrible sort of like irony is that I never summon for boss fights, but I love being summoned for boss fights.
Yeah.
It's like I feel like I'm ruining somebody else's experience. Also, it makes me very like self-conscious whenever I'm in somebody else's game. I'm like, I gotta do really good.
Now, I think it's all part of the chaos is part of the fun. I think like I like to summon here and there, and yeah, that roll of the dice is part of like what's fun because it tends to fall to like the 2 extremes. You'll get a guy who will go in there and die to the boss in the first 5 seconds, or you'll get the guy who's like, it's like just soloing the boss and doing it all for you. Like it's rare to find the people in the middle, but those are the most satisfying people to find.
That's true. It is like the extremes kind of like push the experience up.
Yeah,
for sure.
So yeah, I enjoy the wackiness.
Yeah, I will say this is unrelated. This is related, but it's not important at all. But I do want to say it. If you're summoning somebody for a boss fight, I would say do a run for science first and just check to see if at full health you die from a boss's grab attack. Because I've been summoned to fight Bale so many times, and the host gets one shot by the grab.
Yep.
And then I'm like, oh, he almost died, but you got grabbed one time, and now I have to go back to the waiting room.
That was a problem for me on Mesmer. If I wasn't at full health, the grab would kill me in one hit. And I
would say Mesmer is definitely the exception to that because his grab does like umpteen 1 billion damage.
Yep. But like I did have at least one attempt where I went in there, got grabbed immediately, and then died. So.
I will say at the current state, like I use the golden effigy, like sends your sign to like anywhere that you have activated.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and I was getting like matched in like less than a second.
Mm-hmm.
It's very active right now, which is nice. Especially considering there were some bosses I just like wanted to play again before we did the podcast.
Yeah.
Because they were very either short fights or like ones that I just didn't remember very well. But with all that said, I would like to talk about the bosses
Hell yeah.
of the DLC. Bosses are obviously like a big part of From Software's game design. It's what a lot of people talk about almost exclusively with these games. And it's so weird to me how much Elden Ring has changed my perception on it.
Mm-hmm.
There's another point that I forgot to mention up front that I guess I'll do right now before I get into it.
Okay.
Which is I started the whole episode with this on the Lost episode.
Uh-huh.
And it was basically, there's a video by Matthew Matosis called The Lost Soul Arts of Demon Souls. And it's a video that I like. And much like with any sort of like breakdown or criticism, there are elements that I agree with more than others. One of the things that he talks about in the game, in the video, is that the games have over time focused on challenging the player in one way. And that is a reflex-based way. Can you dodge attacks and then attack the boss back? Which, when that game came out, was like was pretty true, but also I thought pretty minor, not a huge deal. And I think since that video's come out, we've gotten Dark Souls 3 and Elden Ring. As well as games like Sekiro, which I think are different enough to not really matter as much.
Yeah.
But I've just found myself agreeing more and more with this point over time.
Yeah. I think Dark Souls 3 was out when he made that video, and that was part of like what he was pointing to with that criticism.
Yeah, I think it was in reference to Dark Souls 3 and Bloodborne specifically.
Yeah,
I think the games that are like much faster than Dark Souls 1 and 2 were. And yeah, it's like the comparison is comical. Like if you go back and play Dark Souls 1 and compare bosses that were difficult, it still can be difficult because your player abilities are a lot more limited in that game as well.
Mm-hmm.
They move like barely animate stuffed animals in Dark Souls 1 in comparison to like every boss has 6 backflip moves in Shadows of the Erdtree.
Yeah. I actually just I recently got a new laptop and I installed and played through the beginning of Dark Souls 1 just cuz just take it to a test run. And yeah, it's one thing that did stand out after just playing this DLC. Yeah, it's like it's so much more like limited in your movement, like you said, and like the bosses are very much the challenge is just designed completely differently, and the difference really is a lot starker if you haven't revisited like Demon Souls through Dark Souls 2 in a while.
Yeah, it's almost it was definitely like a boil the frog situation.
Yeah.
Where we'd just been playing the games the entire time, so we didn't notice it happening. But it is almost as stark a difference as like the Monster Hunter world cutoff, where like suddenly everything is different. And it's like, hey, this is kind of like the same game, but like you are 50 times faster in terms of like the actions per minute you can do. And it's kind of the same way, like with the Dark Souls games. Like in Dark Souls 3, it really turned it up. And then Elden Ring is just like a anime, acrobatic, other A words that mean agile sort of situation.
Very shonen.
It's a shonen game for sure. Yeah. But yeah, and also Elden Ring has I don't know now because the DLC exists, but I believe it was like 165 bosses in the base game, which is an ass load of bosses. And then I was playing Dark Souls 3, whose DLC had 2 bosses. And I remember thinking, like, man, the DLC doesn't feel like it has that many bosses in it. And then remembering that Dark Souls 3 had a DLC that had 2 bosses, I was like, okay, it actually has a lot of bosses now that I'm thinking about it.
Yeah.
It's a huge sort of amount of content in that sense. So, yeah, let's talk about them. Boss design in Shadow of the Erdtree. Overall, what are your thoughts?
I positive overall. I think this is true of me in most of the Souls games, but like I found my favorite ones not being the main ones. So I think my favorite two, we don't have to talk about them right away, but weirdly were the weird knight that had like the Orphan of Kaz style weapon that rode around on like the skeleton horse.
The putrescent knight.
Yeah, the putrescent knight and the weird like rot centipede lady.
Ramina?
Yeah. Those two were probably my favorite. And I think it's because they were really weird and not expected.
The putrescent knight has
and they weren't super brutally hard either.
Yeah, Putrescent Knight's weird for me. It falls like almost dead center in the pack as far as like bosses in the game go. I agree with you, by the way. I think most of my favorite bosses are ones that are well, actually, I lied. No, most of my favorite bosses probably are. They're all ones that have remembrances, but also the bosses in the game are like most of them do. Like I think there's like 20-ish bosses in the game. And that like includes some things that are just like enemies with health bars, but there are 11 remembrances, which is such a huge number compared to the like as a ratio compared to the total number of bosses in the DLC. So I don't know how you want to define major, but like my favorite boss in the DLC is probably the Erdtree avatar.
Oh yeah, I like that one too.
Yeah, which notably, this game has only one boss that has multiple health bars, and it is that one, and it's my favorite one.
Yeah, they actually managed to do a 3-phase, air quotes, boss fight that I liked.
Yeah, and I think like, and my second favorite is Mater, the Mother of Fingers, which I was fully prepared.
Yeah, I almost forgot about that one.
Yeah, I was fully prepared to come in here and be like, that's my favorite boss. And then I thought about it for like 5 seconds. And I was like, Erdtree Avatar has a much more fair moveset. The arena looks fucking amazing.
And it's got the interesting mechanic of how you can visceral attack it or whatever to like chop off a big chunk of the next health bar.
Right, yeah. So like it even has like a knowledge checkpoint. Like you can come back in and make it a little bit easier on like subsequent attempts. And then like Vetter has like obnoxious, basically undodgeable like energy beam move. And can like kill you in one hit with an annoying side movement thing that has like no wind up or tell. And I was like, I literally was like, I think I just like this boss because it looks creepy and weird.
Yeah.
And that's kind of true, but I'm still holding to it. That's my second favorite boss.
No, those are good call outs. Those probably would have been my 3 and 4, honestly.
Yeah. I do really like the designs. I especially like the visual designs in the game, both of the areas and of the bosses. They had a lot of bosses that weren't a man with a sword.
Yeah,
which is pretty rare. Unfortunately, the final boss is a man with a sword.
I feel like it's okay in that scenario.
It probably is. There's only like a couple final bosses in the whole franchise that are not just a man with a sword, though.
Yeah,
it's like Nishandra.
I mean, Nishandra's basically a guy with a sword.
It's not a man, though.
No.
So that's
and
notable.
She has a scythe, so
and it
is different.
It would be kind of a stretch to call the Orphan of Kos a man with a sword.
Right.
And definitely Moon Presence is not, but Gehrman is.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's a bit of I would say there's a lot of them. But there were a lot that weren't. And some of them were funny skeleton men on a melty horse with a huge fucking circular blade. I also really like the Putrescent Knight. He is Elden Ring pilled though, for sure.
Yeah.
There was like I don't even remember where this came from, if it was just like a joke somebody made on Twitter, or if it was like one of those satirical articles that like the headline was just Elden Ring DLC boss holds attack for 2 real world weeks before attacking. And the Putrescent Knight like was that. Like it would have moves where it just sort of like looked like it was gonna attack you for 20 seconds and you were like, what do I do? But overall, I love the design of it. I do actually like the fight. Very cool. Probably also middle of the pack for me. Good stuff. But there's some more problematic bosses.
Uh-huh.
I do also want to shout out like Rolana and Midra as both being like bosses that I thought were very good. For being just sort of like they had the potential to be really shitty. And they did them, I think, in a way that actually made them fun to play.
Mm-hmm.
Bale, I think, is really close to being very good.
Mm.
I think that Bale needs a second lock-on point because the camera just like fucking loses its mind every time he does anything.
Yeah. I didn't care for Bale, personally.
That's fair. He is a big monster, and big monsters have traditionally been done badly, and I have liked them anyway. That's kind of been like sort of a through line.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think there are other bosses though I am more hesitant to praise. And I think the big ones that I want to talk about are the Dancing Lion, Gaius, Radon, and a little bit of Mesmer.
Uh-huh. Well, please do.
Okay. Well, first thing I want to address is the fact that you beat the Dancing Lion in one attempt, which is crazy to me. And I think is because you blocked it.
Oh, yeah.
And I did not block it.
Yeah, if it was not brought up before, yeah, playing with the fucking giant great shield, so...
That apparently was a good idea, is what I gathered. Because the Dancing Lion's moves are so difficult to read. Looks so cool. The music is a complete banger.
Yeah. S-tier presentation.
Yeah, and I'm so happy for that, because otherwise I would this boss would have driven me to madness and back.
Uh-huh.
It was the one that cemented in my head that I needed to go and get the Skadu tree fragments and level up and shit. But even after I did that, it still took me like 15 tries to beat this boss. And at the end of the 15th try, I didn't feel like I knew his moveset at all.
Yeah, and then I had the complete inverse experience where the game scared me into getting the Skadu tree fragments, and then I pummeled it to death.
Right. Which, I mean, I guess works both ways. Like, if you're a developer, you're like, that's a success one way or the other.
But yeah, I do think, like, it almost feels like... and it's a little bit of a stretch, but oh well, I want to make the connection anyway. It almost feels like... it reminds me of Pinwheel a little bit. In the visual design, because it's like guys under a costume, but you don't know if it's 3 guys or a weird amalgamation, like some kind of like weird creature underneath. So yeah, it gets a lot of points for that.
We because it is a video game that came out after the year 2000. Somebody has immediately pulled the model out.
Oh, yeah.
And it is 2 guys.
Okay, 2
like
guys.
in horse costume sort of stance. And obviously the animations take some liberties because it literally can fly. But it is very cool that they did that. I loved in the intro cutscene for the boss that like you can see the hand underneath of the mask working the mouth. It's so creepy, and I'm very into it. I thought that the design was extremely cool. And I wish that didn't translate into it floating around and spinning in such a way that I couldn't tell one move from another a lot of the time.
Yeah, it feels like the bad execution of a cool concept. Like
Yeah.
taking advantage of the fact that it's dudes in a costume, like making it like move unexpectedly, is awesome on paper. But yeah, like I agree, it's too hard to read.
Also, just a thing that I'll throw in because I'm throwing it in about every other boss that I'm going to talk about. Give me a second lock-on point.
Oh yeah,
Bale and this both needed a second lock-on real bad because like this one will do a thing where like it stands up. I guess both of them stand up like on each other's shoulders. And it does a spin move where it shoots like a breath attack. If you're close to it, what else it does this when it does like its grab and like a few other moves. Because the theme is when it does something, you don't know what it's about to do afterward. If you're close to it when it does any of these moves, the camera just fucking like tilts up at a 50, 60 degree angle and you can't see your character anymore. Or the rest of the boss. So having it instead transfer the lock on to the body would have made that, it would have just solved that problem.
yeah.
And same with Bale. Like Bale will do moves where he like abruptly charges forward and your camera will whip around like 180 degrees and you just won't be able to see what he's doing. Bale took a lot of memorization for me to like know what he was doing, but he's way more readable.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, that's my complaint with that boss. I don't like it. I don't think it's a good boss, and I hope I never fight it again. I will, but
Well, just summon the mimic tier and pummel him to death.
That's true. I should just always be great shield capable when playing through the DLC, I think is the lesson to be learned.
That also helps a lot.
Right. Other boss, second boss.
General whatever.
General Gaius.
Gaius.
Excellent.
I feel like that's not that hard of a name to remember, but I never ever will.
Yeah, I wouldn't have
General Twilight Princess.
Yeah, I wouldn't have remembered his name if I wasn't staring at it for like 2 hours.
I think this once again is another case of the great case of the Great Shield. Because I feel like he took me a few tries, but I feel like he took me like less than 8.
I felt like the way that I've been describing it, and also I learned something new. 2 days ago, maybe this week, that apparently he has been patched.
Oh yeah,
which is great. But not when either of us had fought him. Like it was more recent than that.
Yeah.
Whenever you enter the boss room, this is a good
he's
patch.
just charging at you.
He just charges you instantaneously. Like I think you have like 3 seconds maybe to do something about it. That's problematic for 2 reasons. One, it's very suffocating. I felt like I tried the boss like 6 or 7 times before I beat it, but I died to the boss like 40 times in between each of them, just trying to get a good attempt because he would just one-shot me when I walked into the arena.
Okay.
But the big problems that I find with him are, one, that the charge hitbox I think is just like broken on like a coding level, because it will hit you twice. It's really difficult to dodge. You have to dodge sort of like either straight through him perfectly, otherwise you'll get caught by his ass and you'll explode, which sucks. Or I think that you can like dodge kind of like at an angle, so you dodge the first hitbox and are out of the way for the second one. And I've heard that light load makes it easier. I've read a lot about people's experience with this boss. My experience was all bad. I would try and dodge straight through him every time, and every time I would get caught by his ass. And it sucked.
Yeah.
So the charge is really finicky and difficult to sort of like get around. But one bad charge move does not a terrible boss make. I think the other problem is that it's a boss that they let you fight on a horse. You can get on torrent for this boss, but it is suicidal in my experience. whenever he's attacking, he just moves arbitrarily fast and will just catch up to you. Like, they have some kind of rubber banding on it where no matter how far away you are from him, when he does an attack, he'll just speed up so that the attack will connect.
Yeah, he uses his gravity magic.
He's using gravity magic. It's an in-lore rubber banding. And he's just way too good at killing the horse. Like, most things he did killed Torrent in a single hit. For me, or like 2 hits, maybe.
Yeah, I found that to be the case with, was it the Erdtree Sentinels? Were those the ones that rode the horses and had the giant weapons in the base game?
The tree sentinels?
Yeah, the tree sentinels. I found that to be the case when fighting those in the base game. So, like, I think I tried fighting Gaius, like, once using Torrent and was like, oh, right. I learned this lesson before.
Exactly. You just like do one fight with Torrent and then you go, I was doing so much better not on Torrent.
Yeah.
And like this actual secret, I think, is that you just want to use him to avoid like one attack where he just thrashes around infinitely and it's impossible to dodge. Obviously not impossible to dodge, very difficult to dodge. Thrash move. And so that is kind of it. Like, most of the time, though, you do not want to be on the horse, even though it seems like a fight that they designed for it. So yeah, that's kind of my issue. They wanted you to fight him on a horse at least a little bit, but they made him way too good at killing the horse. The horse provides you no tactical advantage during the fight because he'll just catch up with you, and the charge hitbox is broken. And at least at release, he started every single boss attempt by just running you into the wall and making you have to fight him in a tiny corner. Most of the time he would hit me to a place where the camera couldn't go, and so I would just be staring at him and my character is like occluded completely. It was an extremely bad time. I had no fun fighting him. I think it's the worst boss that From Software has ever made.
I didn't think he was that bad.
Okay,
I don't know. Yeah, I guess blocking him works.
Apparently blocking him works.
Yeah. But you guys have a lot of endurance, though, so, which I do, so. And I actually think I kind of like that he starts out charging at you, but...
Well, I think he can start charging at you, but he should do it from further away. Which I think is what he does now.
Okay.
Like, I think if you like wanted to summon, like the animation to summon takes long enough that he will hit you. Yeah, before you would get it done. Like Larry the Cable Guy. So that's my big problem. That's not all of those things are my big problem. I hate Gaius so much. I had lots of people tell me like, oh, but he looks cool and he has like the move where he spins around in the air and charges at you is cool. And I'm like, first of all, no, it isn't. Like, it's not cool visually. It looks very stupid, in my opinion. But that is subjective.
Yeah, I liked that he used the gravity magic like Radon does. So like, I think like a good little piece of visual storytelling that like he's one of Radon's generals because he uses the same spells.
Yeah, that's not a bad set. Also, the fact that he's like an Albinoric and you can go get his pants from a different Albinoric who's just like hanging out in the back, which I guess is like his wife. I don't know. But there's like a random Albinoric on a wolf in his backyard, and you can just kill her and get his pants. He also gatekeeps 5 Scadu tree fragments, which is just fucking abject cruelty.
He is just hanging out in front of the tree, so...
Yeah. But that's that one. I don't talk about the final boss yet, so I'm going to jump to Mesmer quickly.
What everyone's been waiting for.
Exactly. Mesmer, I actually like a lot as a boss. I particularly like his first phase. I think that the snake phase is patently cool. It's something that I would love. But I think that they need to work out the visuals on the snake moves, because I found that they would just sort of like disappear behind the walls of the arena and I couldn't see what was happening. If that got fixed, I think Mesmer would be like one of my favorite bosses in the game. As it stands, I think his first phase is really fun. It was fun to actually learn it. I will say the multi-stab move that he does with the spear as part of like a 4-hit combo, to me, was very difficult to read, like where I was supposed to be to not take damage from that. So I guess that's like kind of a downside, but for the most part, I thought he's like pretty intuitive. Like he doesn't do a lot of things that feel like unfair or like they were intentionally like roll catchy. Like they're just sort of attacks that you see coming and have tells and can dodge. So I like that about him.
Yeah, yeah. I do think they do a little bit too much of he just goes right into another attack after he finishes one a little bit too much, but that's true of like every boss in Elden Ring. But yeah, I mean, it just continues to be a tale of two builds. Because like I thought the second phase was actually easier. Because yeah, and counterintuitively to like what it looks like when a giant snake is flying at you, you can easily block it with a shield. So I can.
And famously, when snakes are flying at you, is like you have the least time to intuit things.
Yeah, yeah. But yeah, I could just take that whole big string of attacks and then do a riposte attack at the end of it, and it was like a free hit. So
yeah, that seems fair to me.
Yeah.
There was like a weird swap there.
I do like though, like how he feels like he is balanced around you summoning a full party of people to fight him. At least in my experience, because like when I beat him, I summoned 2 people plus the NPC summon, and it was still hard. Like I think he feels like he's designed with that in mind, and like the spectacle of fighting him with a group, I thought was really cool.
Yeah, and I think they do a lot of that. You touched on 2 things that I think are sort of like overarching design trends with the bosses in the DLC. One, having just a giant melee with the boss with like a bunch of people is almost always accounted for. Like it was something that was like commonly people. This is why I don't think that summoning is actually easier anymore. Back in the day, you could summon somebody to fight like a boss in Dark Souls, and it would just be easy because now the boss can't do enough damage to either one of you as long as you trade aggro well. And in this game, they just will do a spin move or like moves that attack primarily people in front of them, but like have a hitbox behind them and stagger people if you're like trying to wail on them while they're occupied with somebody else, which I think is genuinely good for the most part because it means that the bosses are not as easily like cheesed, like overcome without difficulty. But it is also very obvious in the design when something just inexplicably like fucking sends a fireball out their asshole and you're like, oh no, I wasn't expecting that.
Excuse you.
Yeah. But yeah, if there was a constant frustration in the DLC, it is definitely that openings for attacks are like a second long. It's to me, it's counterintuitive with the way that they've been designing the Ashes of War, and part of the reason I don't use them is because they all have like 1.5 2-second wind-ups on them, and like the ones that like the spells and stuff that have like a lot of fanfare because they're like big important spells are functionally useless against like any enemy because they will just hit you before they can go off. I took a clip because I did go. We're gonna talk about this boss later, but I went like full like Great Shield tank build for Radahn specifically, and I remember clipping a section where I was fighting him, and I was like, "Is this just like the optimal damage I can do?" And it was like block, attack him one time, then put the shield back up immediately. It is like that is what I mean when I say I agree more and more about Matthew Matos's point every day is like it feels like your turn in the fight is constantly getting shorter.
Yeah. I've really strongly agreed with that since the DLC of Dark Souls 3 personally. But yeah, Matthew Matosis is my spirit animal, and I pretty much agree with like 100% of his opinions. So
Fair enough. You were sort of prophetic in that
Yeah.
sense. But yeah, I don't know. Special shout outs. You mentioned Ramina.
Yeah.
I will submit this is my bona fide for me actually being good at Souls games. Ramina is the only like major boss that I beat in a single try.
Nice.
Yeah,
I think she took me
know.
2.
Yeah,
I
seen.
think the rot got me the first time.
It'll do that. Oh yeah, if you're
was-
blocking especially.
It was cool to have that pop back up, like little ties to other characters. Like I said with Gaius, like using the gravity magic. I liked that. Yeah, that is it Ramina?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Or
I like
Romina. I don't know.
Yeah.
how to
I like
pronounce it.
that she had like essentially like rot goddess, like some kind of connection to Melania. Yeah.
Yeah. So with the butterflies too, like coming
Yeah.
back as a motif, which I would have assumed was something that was tied directly to Melania, and I think it is. But I just didn't get very much in terms of like lore about who Ramina was.
Right. Yeah. Me
So-
neither. But I like that you can tell there's a connection, even
Yeah.
though you don't know.
It's a good motif and one that I like a lot. But yeah, I do like the boss. I like the big centipede. I wish that there were big centipedes just as enemies in the game.
Yeah.
Because they're cool, but that's fine. They wanted something unique for the boss, and that's cool. Also, a long line of insect / arachnid people as bosses in Souls
Yeah.
games. I'm glad we got another entry for that. Very cool boss. Really like the arena. I like that she's just like pink as hell.
Yeah.
Really good
Visual
stuff.
design, yeah.
Yeah, big fan. And I beat it in one try. Everybody, please heap praise onto me. I'm pretty sure everyone agrees that she's like the easiest remembrance boss.
Yeah.
So this is not actually bragging rights. But yeah, so that one was that. And then yeah, we'll talk about the final boss. Unless you want to talk about the NPC fight, because I know we did a little bit before.
I mean, we can mention it. It's really cool.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I like that it interacts with the quest lines in such a way that you can change sort of the makeup of the fight. I didn't, or I did, but I only made it harder for myself. But I still love the fight at the end of the day. So
Yeah. I think I only had one person helping me, and I'm not even 100% sure who it was. But yeah, I like it when they use the NPCs in interesting ways. I like the Radon fight in the base game just because you can summon a billion dudes to help you. So I think it's really cool, and it really, I think, enhances like the drama of the ending. When all these NPCs are like trying to stop you from killing Mikola. So yeah, I think really effective scene for what it is. And it makes the NPCs feel like a band of mercenaries, like they're supposed to. So
yeah,
big success in my book.
Was it you? You made a reference to that this was like somehow a reference to Berserk, right?
It did not really. I wouldn't really call it a reference, but it is. They are reminiscent of the Band of the Hawk, I think.
Gotcha.
Which
okay.
is and Mikola is a lot like Griffith. So there are parallels, as always.
Yeah, I want to make sure that it was cataloged. You know.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I like that, and I like that sort of ingratiated me to Ansbach more, because like traditionally I didn't care much about like that band, but he sort of emerged as like a very supportive character, and I loved that he is like the only person outside of like boss cutscenes that acknowledges who you are as a character.
Yeah.
Because you can be like, oh, right, I gotta tell you that I did kill Moog, who's like the guy that you follow. And he was like, don't worry about it, dude. I'm sure that it was fine. That's not exactly how it should be characterized. But yeah, he's like not mad about it. which made me feel good. Though honestly, it would have been kind of cool if he did get mad about it, and like you could fuck him up as like the last thing before the final boss.
He's just in a real chill mood.
He's like in a real chill mood. But then you fight the final boss, and the final boss is really a boss I didn't get any satisfaction out of. But I'll say I don't dislike his moveset as much as the lion or Gaius, like,
or the witch or the wardrobe.
or the or the witch or the wardrobe. Honestly, those are downright easy. But I think I felt like his his actual moves were pretty learnable. They all came in like very long strings, which makes it difficult to dodge, but not bad if you're blocking it, because you can sort of just know what the first and last move in a combo is, and you can just kind of deal with it from there. So that's nice. Obviously, the second phase is where the boss becomes problematic. Because just holy rain of light coming down from the sky it's visually very difficult to like get a handle on. But I still think it is more learnable than those other bosses, or at least more like reasonable to. My problem with Radahn comes more in the fact that I feel like he is emblematic of everything that I am afraid the series will become. Because if every other boss had short punish windows, his windows are even shorter than that. He resets status conditions when he goes from his first to his second phase. So you have to apply them twice in order to, and probably more than that. He has a surprise third phase, like he jumps up in the air and does the meteor attack, which is dope.
Yeah,
love that it's there. And it's easier to dodge than the one in the proper Radahn fight. But like it just all kind of, it's the kind of challenge that I'm not interested in, similar to the way that I feel about Melania.
Yeah.
Like I am just not like I'm old. I mean, I'm canonically 19, but I'm old and tired, and I don't want to spend my entire existence playing these games not for the interesting world design and the cool items and the RPG elements of making builds that have cool synergies between pieces and all of the stuff that I really like about these games. I don't want to spend all of my time just fighting one boss over and over again to like perfectly memorize the moveset so that I don't die in 2 hits. To me, that is just not what I seek. And while I don't think Radahn is nearly as offensive as Gaius is, I do find him saddening to me on like an existential level.
Yeah, no, I hard agree. But I got to this place like a long time ago, though. So
I am just reliving parts of your life that happened earlier.
For me, it was like Orphan of Kaz, I think was my breaking point. So yeah, you know, I hard agree. Like, I do, I guess, kind of on paper, like the idea of like showing Radahn in his prime. That's like a clear like thing I think that comes through in the design, that like when you fought him in the main game he was old and busted, and now this is like Radahn, bitch.
It's the new hotness.
It is the new hotness. So that's kind of cool. But yeah, like I think that it is a bit, just too much. Like, like everything that I dislike about the like nonstop combos, I think it's probably the most extreme it's ever been.
Yeah.
And what's up with that one attack where like Mikola like kisses you or whatever?
That is so when Mikola picks you up, she charms you,
right?
And then, or they charm you, and then if you get grabbed again while you have the debuff, it's a game over. You like canonically, I suppose, you join Mikola's side. Like, right. You kneel down to them, and then it just says, but I think it just still says you died. I don't know. I don't think that you actually do die, but yeah.
Bitch.
Yeah.
Yeah, because you just like I summoned you for the fight, and you just told me
Right.
about it. So like, I didn't know how that like mechanic is introduced, or if it's clued at how to deal with it.
Yeah. If anybody, the clue is that is not is a traditional Dark Souls clue. Actually, I can't complain that much because it's not like there isn't precedent for this.
Mm-hmm.
But it's in the item description for Mikla's Great Rune that you get from beating the Erdtree avatar.
Okay.
Which you may have just forgotten about completely, because there's nothing stopping you from going to the avatar like immediately. It says something like its only use now is for dispelling curses or dispelling charms. And so you have to identify that that's what's happening, which I don't think you can really do until it actually kills you once.
Right.
But yeah, that's sort of it. It's like a thing that kills you in one hit if you let it happen to you twice. And there is a way to prevent the second death. Also, imagine having to use an item in the middle of the Radon fight. Like, you have like maybe 2 moves that give you an opportunity large enough to do it without getting hit. Though I will say, if anybody's like, oh, you ruined the experience for Andy, he could let him die to the thing. Like, literally less than 12 hours before that, I had spent 4 consecutive hours trying to fight Radon. And I was like, I don't want to be here for 4 more hours.
Yeah.
I'm just going to tell Andy to not get hit by the thing that kills him in one hit.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't care.
Yeah. So I was pretty over Radon at that point in my life. And still kind of am, to be fair. It's something that I will probably fight at some point in the future, but I'm not going to be like ecstatic about it.
Uh-huh.
So that's it. The final boss made me sad. I kind of wish it wasn't Radon also. Like,
Yeah.
I wish I was fighting somebody completely new with a different moveset completely and not using the same swords that everyone in PvP uses.
Yeah, I felt that disappointment as well. Like, even though he's like mentioned and it's not really like supposed to be a surprise that he showed up, it still felt like one. When I walked in the door and he was there, I was like, oh, okay.
Oh no. Yeah.
It wasn't oh no, but like it was like,
I think if we just make noises for a while, people understand what the emotion we're going for. But yeah, it is. It's a little disappointing, just not from a narrative perspective, but from like a gameplay perspective. This is the last boss that I'm going to see in Elden Ring, right? Like, in specifically Elden Ring is the last boss that I get to see. And it's Radon again. Like, I don't know. It's just a little sad. Even if the moveset is completely different, it's still just like not cool enough for me. I'm very hard to please, apparently. I also really liked the Elden Beast fight, which like nobody agrees with me on. So they probably shouldn't do the things that make me happy, because they just run contrary to what other people actually enjoy. So there's much more to talk about, too, I know.
We've been going for 51 minutes.
It's fine. Just keep it. Maybe this is a 3-parter.
Yeah.
This is the Erdtree avatar of podcasts.
Yeah. Yeah. So one thing I wanted to talk about is the world and the dungeons.
Yep.
So yeah, I quite like the variety on offer in all the different areas of the DLC. I particularly like things like the ancient ruins of Ra and things like the Abyssal Woods, and I liked the Shadow Keep. It's Cerulean Coast is cool. The Stone Coffin Fisher. Pretty much all of them are cool.
Yeah.
So yeah, I particularly like how the ancient ruins of Ra is just an overworld and a dungeon woven together. Like, you can just go in and out. You can ride Torrent inside the dungeon because it's technically still part of the overworld. And it has like a different architectural style that kind of makes it feel like Dark Souls 1, like moving from like the Undead Burg and stuff from the first half into Anne Orlando. It has like a shift like that.
Right.
So yeah, really cool, and I like that the Abyssal Woods mechanics are like kind of a misfire, but I like that they took a weird chance with it, and that like it's like a kind of hard to get to, and it has like a weird like Louisiana Bayou mansion in it and stuff. So yeah, a lot of really cool, unique looking set pieces that I was super jazzed about.
Yeah. Like if you sat me down and showed me the areas, like the Abyssal Woods is a very cool concept that you mentioned misfired. I think largely because we had like a too long of a discussion about it. I would say before.
Yeah.
It essentially like I felt like. Well, there is one point that I would like to bring up again that is not that important, but something I do think is relevant. One, the Abyssal Woods just has too many developer messages in it telling you not to fight the guys. Because one of the messages just says like, don't or like don't let them see you or don't let it see you, however it's worded.
Mm-hmm.
And that's scary. And also that's all I needed at all. And the fact that it follows those the ruined forge like miniature dungeons that are in the overworld, where their developer messages telling you to hit a glowing weak point on an enemy's back, that's crazy to me. Coming from Software, like developer of Dark Souls, is now telling me to hit the enemy spider in its weak point for massive damage. Like, I found that to be like not just patronizing in the way that I might find it in other games, though less likely to find it as patronizing in other games, but also just like kind of disappointing coming from Software, a game that usually respects its players and is respecting its players actively in other parts of the same game. It felt very weird to have those messages there. But otherwise, Abyssal Woods looks really cool. The dungeon that's in it is super great. Fucking Raw is maybe a little bit too long. Otherwise, perfect area. I love it. I think that place is great. I like that there were like so many different paths that they were kind of able to do because it was an open world in addition to being dungeon-esque. So you could go through, like, there's like a whole area of like a bunch of bridges over just a void, and you can like walk across them and jump with Torrent across gaps, and then you get a cool talisman, and there's an elevator there.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I liked all the different paths. I thought it was cool. And it looks great, like you mentioned.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like it's weird to just agree with that point. I have nothing else to add. It just looked really good.
Yeah, I just
very lush.
Yeah. I just one of those cool design things that I imagine they were sitting around and being like, what did we not do in the base game? It's like, what about an area that like weaves a dungeon with the overworld? And I'm glad that they had that idea. Yeah, it's really cool. But yeah, and one of the other big thing is Shadow Keep, which is the dungeon that Mesmer is the boss of. I think is awesome. I love that it like connects to multiple areas. I like that it has like multiple entrances. It has the whole thing where you can drain the water to get to the lower levels. Like it feels like a really fleshed out location, and like it really has like Dark Souls 1 vibes to me. Like if they ever go back to, which I at this point I feel like I doubt they ever will, but I really want them to like a more tightly designed Metroidvania-esque design like the first Dark Souls. I feel like Shadow Keep is a good blueprint. Like I think like instead of like a hub like Firelink Shrine, like maybe put a dungeon at the center of the world and have things spiral out around it. Which would even kind of call back to like I think Shadow Keep might be a reference to Shadow Tower Abyss. It might even kind of like call back to those. Because like I think Shadow Tower, yeah, like the whole game is like a big dungeon, right, in a tower. So like I don't know, it could be even like tie in some Kingsfield and Shadow Tower influence into it as well. Which I just think that would be really cool, and it really got my it really engaged my imagination going through that dungeon.
Oh, for sure. I think the one thing that I will say that it's like Shadowkeep does something so well that it ends up being a negative for a lot of players, including myself, which is that it is such an imposing and prominent like thing on the map that I avoided going there for so long.
Yeah.
But there are like multiple entrances and exits that don't necessarily put you against Mesmer.
Right, yeah, you can go through it multiple times without getting to him, yeah.
Yeah. And so there isn't a really good reason to avoid going through it. But because it was so like big and important looking, I was like, well, I want to hold off on that. So my advice, if you haven't played the game yet, is go to it.
Yeah.
Also, why have you listened to this much? We've spoiled everything. Oh God.
Yeah. I hadn't considered that. That never even crossed my mind.
Everyone that I've talked to, which is like 3 people, I'm not trying to oversell it, has been like, I didn't go to Shadowkeep until like I had explored everywhere around it because I just didn't want to like run into the end boss or something.
Right. Yeah, for me, I think the Jagged Peak was the only area that gave me that vibe.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, I'm a dungeon slut. I want to do the dungeons, baby.
I agree. Also, not Dragon Keep, not the Dragonary, fucking the Jagged Peaks.
Oh, yeah.
Are a great place to go to and then turn around and do later. Because it is like a short area that is just like a series of dragon boss fights, which is very understandable to want to avoid. However, that is the way that I went to get to Chara's Hidden Grave, which is another very cool area. And I just talked about bosses I didn't like. I didn't give you my ranking of the hardest bosses in the game, which are number 1, I think, Radahn. I think number 2, Commander Gaius. I think number 3, just a Deathrite bird, but with ads.
I didn't think that one was that bad.
God, I died to him, I think, third most of all bosses.
Yeah. Also, the idea of Gaius being harder than Bale seems very silly to me.
That's the Dark Souls thing, right? Like, the different bosses are harder for different people, but Deathrite Bird plus other birds ruined me.
No, it was a hard boss, especially for one that's in the middle of a field. But yeah, like, I remember we were fighting Bale, and you were like, before we fought him, like, I think the other 2 bosses we haven't done yet are harder. And then like we fought like Bale like 8 times, and I was like, oh god, the other 2 bosses are harder. And I did not find that to be the case at all, personally.
Yeah, we like 3-shot Midra, a boss that took me like an hour and a half, like on my playthrough. Like Midra, like once I learned it, Midra was really fun.
Yeah.
But Midra, I was like, in my head, I'm like, Midra's like a hard boss.
Yeah.
But yeah, Bale did not tick that for me, but it definitely went in the other direction.
I think, other than Radahn, he gets my vote for hardest boss. But anyway, the other area, I meant to mention this in NPC talk, but the Stone Coffin Fisher I thought was super awesome to find. Because like you find that chasm and at the end of the Cerulean Coast area, and I was like, there's definitely something up with this, right? But then like I'm circling around it, and I'm like, oh, maybe not. Like maybe, but then I do find the path down. I'm like, oh, fuck yeah. And then like I'm going down, and like the area has this like real sense of like foreboding and mystery to it. Like you brought up when we were talking yesterday in the last recording, RIP. There's like an area where there's like animals bowing down, or you thought they were bowing down, but they're actually sleeping.
Right. I had not put the Saint Trina pieces together at the time, and thought that they were some like god of wilderness that I was about to approach, and it creeped me out.
I mean, and it does have that vibe. And then I compared it to the skeletons bowing down to Nido in Dark Souls 1. And it does have like a kind of similar vibe, like you're descending down into an underworld or something. So yeah, super awesome, looks cool, feels super atmospheric and awesome. And then I feel like Saint Trina herself has such Fair Lady from Dark Souls 1 energy. Like I just wanted to bring that up again.
Right.
Cuz like so intriguing and interesting and cool and then just kind of peters out.
Unfortunate, yeah.
Yeah.
Really good design.
Oh yeah, love
for
it.
what it's worth.
With the
I will
face
say that
you don't notice.
yeah. It's like you have to look all over. It's like, where is the face on this? Is there a face? Is this like a Dr. Seuss type, like plant creature? Yes, kind of to all of this. It's funny because like that area, despite me thinking the Putrescent Knight is just sort of like middle to above average in terms of like the full roster of bosses, I think that the Stone Coffin Fisher is my favorite like dungeon taken as a whole. It's really cool. There's a great variety of enemies in it. I love dungeons where you go down, where you just keep going down. There's the one that ends in Jory, one of the more bad bosses in the game, and like leads into the Abyssal Woods, is a really cool dungeon because you just keep getting on elevators that just keep going down further and further.
And it leads to a new location.
Yeah.
Which is awesome.
It's sick as fuck. Yeah. So I do love that kind of stuff. And the Stone Coffin Fisher just is great aesthetically for me as well.
Yeah.
Loved it.
Yeah. And then I do the one other big thing that I think I want to talk about is the Finger Ruins and a little bit about the side quests. Because like that whole side quest that you get to go to the Finger Ruins, because like I think they stand out on the map and they look a little bit like crop circle-esque. Like they stand out on the map, and like you may wander into one before you even get the quest. And if you do that, it really feels like something's missing. Like there should be a boss there or some kind of event or NPC or something. But you just get like a talisman, you know. And like like for me, like I went to that cathedral where you get the quest and found it really intriguing and interesting, like the big shady cathedral with the weird pale guy priest man.
The pale man.
Yeah, it gives you the weird quest to go check out the Finger Ruins. You know, that sticks in the memory. But I think I really lost the thread on it. It's so hard to get to the second Finger Ruins. So by the time I did, I like just forgot about that quest. And then like had to like resort to like walkthrough mode to finish it and just like do all the steps right in a row. So like I feel like the Souls games are usually better at like if you stumble onto a quest without the context, it's still like rewarding and interesting. And this one, I think, without the context, feels like a big nothing, which is unfortunate because the Finger Ruins are metal and badass.
Yeah, that was the thing. I think, and we can talk about this after a genius segue that I'll do afterward. The Finger Ruins are a thing that I was very excited for when I saw them. Like I spent time, because I found them for the first time in the area that's like south of Jagged Peak. It's kind of part of Jagged Peak. It's where the big dragon is. And it's like you can circle around to the back and there's like an item you can pick up there, but you can see down to the Finger Ruins, and it looks weird from a distance. And then as I get closer and I'm like, are those fucking fingers? Like the big fingers that are all over this game for some reason. I was like so fascinated by it, and I spent like a long time trying to figure out how to get down to it and like plotting a route and revisiting old locations.
It
to
does
actually
take
find a way
to figure
there.
it out.
Yeah, so it was really cool to actually like do to be motivated by seeing something in the world and wanting to go to it and get to it, and then having there be, because I hadn't been to Manasalis yet, fucking nothing at all. There was nothing there. So it's like a very cool visual spot, which like I play a walk-in simulator every here and there. I like a cool visual moment, but it feels different in the context of this game. There's a lot of moving around without a lot of anything to reward you for doing it. And I found that to be true of like many areas in the game, unfortunately. We had like a little bit of a disagreement on this, I think, when we talked about it before. I find this game to be kind of bereft of new cool shit around every corner, which may have been a slight overreach on my expectations. But at the same time, like, the finger ruins are obviously calling out to you as something that's like it's like a big part of the map, and at most you're gonna get one item, and it's gonna be a very boring one. Yeah, like the talisman you get from it is the Crimson Dew whatever talisman, the one that makes it so that your flasks heal for more, which might be like the best talisman in the game in the context of the DLC, where your puny flasks are not healing off the enormous damage that the bosses are doing to you. But it is just an inherently unexciting thing. Increase the amount of healing you can do is not like is not that great of a, in your head, it doesn't spark the same things. So I was like getting progressively more and more disappointed with this whole finger thing as I played through the DLC. And then when I finally got to the third part, it like really came around. Like I thought it was worth the effort. But it's absolutely not worth having two giant areas that have nothing in them. And not only that, but like I think this applies to the Abyssal Woods as well. The Abyssal Woods has nothing to keep you going.
It's too big for what it is, yeah.
Yeah. And it's like, it's not like, there are times where it's like you're in the main game and it's like, should I go there? And you can be like, well, it does have X or Y. There's a reason for me to go do this thing. And it's like, should I explore the Abyssal Woods beyond going to the mansion? No. Just no. Yeah. There's almost no reason.
Yeah, there's
a
Skadu tree fragment in there. But
there's
it's
Skadu tree fragment. Yeah, a fist weapon and a perfume weapon, both of which are like the most niche category of weapon that you could possibly have.
Yeah.
And they both do madness, a status effect that does not affect pretty much anything in the game. It only affects other players. So it is like it's a very questionable area. But I thought there was just like a lot of them. I think that this is like a criticism that I will lighten on as I play the game more times, because I think that having areas that I don't need to go is probably actually positive. But it didn't feel like I was being rewarded for my exploration as much.
Yeah, and I guess just to say my piece on it, because I feel like we talked way too long about it yesterday. I think like the main game I think does a really great job of like feeling like an adventure and rewarding your exploration. Like you always feel like you're finding cool treasure. It feels like there's a variety of things and you never know what you're gonna get from a particular location. And I think it's more about like the distribution of the materials, because like for me playing the DLC, it really felt like just get weapons and upgrade materials. Like it felt very transparently like just those things. So it made it feel like more treadmill, and less like video abstracted and video gamey, like I'm adventuring. So yeah. So I think it's more like like a little like about the variety and the distribution, I think, is where my problems with it lie. And I do think like you were also kind of getting at there. They try some gimmicks and some interesting things with areas in this that feel like they just don't get to be fleshed out. Or like I think I described it as stuff that like was almost like too cool for its own good, and I wish that they would have saved it for the next full game that they make instead of trying it out on the DLC. So yeah, it just feels like a little bit of like the way things are like distributed and balanced throughout the DLC. And I mean, it's hard to fault them too much for it, but because it is a DLC. But you definitely can poke some holes in it for sure.
Yeah, I think to me it's more just like it sucks that especially coming off of that last conversation, because I think debatably and definitely very debatably, people could have a lot of conversations about this exact topic and come to different conclusions. But I think potentially the best thing that the DLC does is in its design of its areas. Like the fact that the world is so vertical. We talked in the last episode, RIP, that the that the theming, like the strong color theming of the areas, helps with the map, even because the map has to show so many levels. It would be difficult to discern like which area is which if they all had the same sort of ground color.
Yeah.
So it's like it's clear that a lot of care was taken in making these distinct areas, and it's laid out in such an interesting way. Like you said, fucking there's a random catacomb that leads to a fully new area, and the Shadow Keep connects a bunch of different places in a lot of different ways. And it's a very cool and well thought out world that I think is just lacks the stuff that will motivate you to view it on subsequent playthroughs.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of motivation. You might feel a little cheated, but there is still a lot of motivation to go to these places on your first playthrough. So it's hard to fault it for that. But I think like on future playthroughs, I'm gonna spend a lot less time like standing on the edges of cliffs looking for potential pathways.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a bit of a bummer, but also like it plays into what I think is one of the DLC's strongest points. So tough to say.
Yeah.
I did want to mention, we talked about it a little bit and we were talking about areas. So I think just like a brief aside, I said on the first episode, like the Elden Ring episode of this podcast, that if the DLC was just like 200 caves, I would be I would be okay with it, because I just love exploring caves, which has been, honestly, I've been eating good recently. We got Elden Ring, we had Tears of the Kingdom. There's tons of cave exploring to be done in video games these days.
Spelunking abound.
There is a lot of spelunking. But this really severely cut back on the number of caves, which I'm not levying as a criticism because that's insanity. What I will say is that they expanded what a cave is significantly. Now the catacombs are these like multi-layered areas that are like really sprawling, like almost like D&D dungeon style challenges with lots of like area puzzles and unique traps and shit. And then the what I guess kind of caves, but the jails, the ones that have all the pots in them, these ones disappointed me a little bit more because I think they didn't have enough variety to them. They all looked really similar, and the enemies in them were very similar, and for the most part you were just like kind of climbing down in them, which is also kind of true of the catacombs. But they didn't have like cool traps.
Yeah.
But still, it's interesting that they took like what was essentially like the bite-sized part of the game and expanded into these like huge, like potentially hour-long excursions in the DLC.
Yeah. No, I was a big fan of that, actually. Like, I would have been suspicious that I would fall on the side of fewer caves that are bigger and have more of an impact and variety would be better. And no surprise, I do think that 100%.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm glad that you brought up the jar caves, because was this a thing that was a reveal in the DLC, or did we know this in the main game and I forgot? But they reveal what's inside the jars.
Oh.
It's like weird body horror humans stuffed inside the jars. Like, that blew my mind the first time one of them busted out. I'm like, oh my god. Like, that's what's in the jars?
It is horrifying, and especially like that first time you see it like come out. I don't know if it's the first one you see, but I have a distinct memory of like walking into a room and having one like crawl slowly out of an upturned jar.
Yeah.
And I was like, that's so gross. I love it.
Yeah. That's just an ordinary crabby. Oh my goodness.
I do want to say, just for the sake of people potentially commenting, it was a reveal of what's inside these jars, but technically is not what's inside the other jars.
Okay.
If I remember the
I'm
lore
head
correctly,
canon that there are people in the jars in the main game, because that's more interesting.
There are people in the jars. In the main game, if I remember the lore correctly, the jars take corpses to the catacombs to bury them, and then if you're buried under the Erdtree, that's how they like pass on within the lore of Elden Ring.
Mm-hmm.
In this game, the weird things in the jars are saints, which are the shaman. Mm-hmm. It's like what Marika's village had in them, but apparently their flesh is good at this. It comes from the whip that has teeth on it. Item description. Apparently they like stuff them into jars, and then they would put other bodies in the jars, and then they would fuse with them to become these things. And I can't remember why. But it's why the people of the Erdtree have such a beef with the Horn Scent, because they were the ones doing it.
Right.
And the Horn Scent seemed like they were just kind of bad overall.
Yeah, it doesn't sound
but I'm
good.
basing that a lot on the item description of a whip with teeth on it. So take that with a grain of salt. That's where like half my information's coming from.
Yeah. But all
Loved
that to
him,
say,
though.
yeah, all that to say, fewer caves, greater variety. Big thumbs up in my book.
This is definitely one of those situations where it was a wise idea to not do the thing that Chad wanted to do. I'm just very easily amused by caves, and if they put a bunch of them in, I'd be real happy.
Yeah.
I do love them in this, though, I would say.
Yeah. I just,
still
for me, like, kind of similarly to, like, something like shrines in Breath of the Wild, I think, like, there's just a few too many that it gets old, so I feel like you got to find that sweet spot in the middle.
Yeah. I think what they need to do is find a spot where people don't feel the need to like do all of them. I think putting a boss with a Both health bar at the end of every cave in base Elden Ring was probably a bad idea. Because it makes people feel like they need to complete all the caves for all the cool items.
Right.
But you can just you can skip them. You probably skipped at least a few.
Right. Just
apply that to more of them.
Yeah.
But yeah, I agree with you. It's better designed the way that they are in the DLC, which is really what we're here to talk about.
Uh-huh.
Do we have Skadu thoughts?
Oh God, my Skadu thoughts. This one's hard to narrow down.
I agree.
Yeah, I guess overall positive, right? It is still Elden Ring. FromSoft is still making the best games out there right now. So still batting 1,000. But yeah, I think. God, where do we even start? God, this is really hard. I don't know how I didn't give this any thought. So
it'll come to you. It'll come to you.
Yeah. Overall positive. It came out, and it was hard not to run through it too fast. I intentionally made myself pump the brakes and not just like no life it. And I enjoyed my time with it. I think like a lot of the new weapons are cool. I loved the world. Like a lot of the variety in the areas, I think made me hopeful for future games. I love Bloodborne and I really like Dark Souls 3, but those games are very gray and covered in gravestones. So I feel like the aesthetic was getting a little homogenous, and it's nice to see more variety. Just completely embraced.
This one has spectral gravestones.
Yeah, that are kind of yellow and not gray.
Yeah, totally different.
Totally different. Yeah, I like to see them playing around with things like the Ruins of Ra, which is like dungeon and overworld. I thought Shadow Keep was awesome. That way it felt a little bit more Dark Souls 1 in style. Even though the Abyssal Woods was, described as a misfire, I like that they tried a weird thing. It has kind of Demon Souls, Dark Souls 1 energy in that way. So yeah, a lot to like. I think it's just the shortcomings I think it has, my disappointments with it, I think come from the fact that it's a DLC. I'm sure they wanted to take more time with it. They maybe bit off a little bit more than they could chew. Like the size of the world, it seems like they maybe were scrambling to fill it fully by the end. Even though they took 2 years. So, but I mean, they pull it off though overall. A lot of cool moments. The whole Saint Trina thing. Like I think there were plenty of things that made a big impact. And I really enjoyed my time with it. I think like overall, not as strong as like Artorias of the Abyss or the Old Hunters in my book, but it's up there. I think I liked it more than Dark Souls 3's DLC. I don't know if that's a hot take, if people like those ones.
Not a high bar for me anyway.
Yeah,
you definitely we're on the same page there.
Yeah, so no, I thoroughly enjoyed my time with it. Like I don't know, I feel like I don't have like super strong opinions on it though overall, which feels a little weird. Yeah, I don't know. It's a weird note to end on, but I liked it. I thought it was good, and I think that is okay.
I think that we are kindred spirits to an extent on that. I think it's less that we think that it is okay or that it is like kind of in the middle, and more that I think it has a lot of extremes on both sides. Or maybe that's me and I'm projecting.
No, I think that's fair to say.
Yeah, because that's kind of where I'm at with it. It's a in my opinion, it is a worthy DLC for Elden Ring. It feels very much in the design area. And I realize that, like, to people who are outside of, like, the FromSoft cult, where everything that they do is great, which honestly doesn't really apply to us. We have our own opinions on different aspects of how they've been designing games. But this sounds like such a petty difference between the games that all have kind of a similar mechanic set. But, like, Elden Ring's design is Elden Ring. Like, it's different than Dark Souls, it's different than Bloodborne, it's different than Sekiro. And I think that this DLC does a great job of kind of like pushing that to the point where, to like very close to its breaking point. Elden Ring is by far the most like active and very almost messy kind of combat system that has a lot of options, and this game really wants you to take advantage of those. And forces you to some extent, or at least to explore your options in order to overcome the challenges that they have, because it is just so hard. It's just so hard at times. And like to some extent that is what you're here for, but to another extent it's like I feel like some of these are pushed in a way that I don't want to engage with as much. It kind of breaks the almost more relaxing experience that I have with an open world game. So it has these like slow and fast parts, but all of this can kind of apply to the entirety of Elden Ring. I think the DLC's strengths are in its design visually. I think its music is really good. I think that the time that I spent in this game, mostly I was just in awe of the way that they're able to make things look incredible. I have the points where I had frustration had very high points of frustration for me. But I think that I'm still very happy with it overall. I, unlike Andy, did no life this 100%. I've spent pretty much every waking moment of my life where I wasn't obligated to be somewhere else playing it. and just like I finished it in a week. It was extremely sad to see as an adult man not doing anything with their life but playing this game. And I don't think I would have done that if I didn't like the DLC. Like, it's very good, and I'm personally very excited for the randomizer to get updated to include it, because I think that will make a fun addition to playing through the game. So I am very happy with it. Though it does fill me with an existential dread that FromSoft games are going to continue to push the envelope to the point where I won't be having fun engaging with them. But only time will tell on that. As far as this one goes, I think it checks out.
Hell yeah.
Hell yeah. Christ almighty, thank you for listening to this extremely long episode of the No Clip Podcast this week.
What are we talking about next time?
Next time, we're going to be talking about another long DLC in the form of Xenoblade Chronicles 3 Future Redeemed. More of a, this I think is a more reasonable length DLC to a long game, and one that takes place completely outside of the context of the original. Not the context, but like the mechanical world of the original.
Yeah, it's its own thing.
It is its own thing. So hopefully you'll check that out. If you've played Xenoblade. I didn't think about the demographic issues of doing all expansions for for 4 episodes.
When have we ever thought about demographic?
Literally never. But until that time, if you want to get a hold of us, all of our contact information is on our website at noclippodcast.com or on splattershot.pro. There you can find links to our Twitter account, our email address, the YouTube channel where we post all of our old episodes, the Discord where we talk about games generally and games that we've already talked about on the podcast, but do it with other people. And you can suggest games for us to play, and we can suggest episodes for you to listen to, such as the ones that we've done on Elden Ring.
And Bloodborne.
And Dark Souls,
Lunacid,
the Lies of P.
Yeah, no shortage of Souls likes.
Yeah, and maybe more in the future. Ooh.
I keep thinking, this popped into my head when I said demographic. I was like, demographic. More like dem graphics.
More like dem graphics, though. More like Demogorgon.
Pump up dem graphics in level 3.
Pump up the like button on this podcast.
That's it.
Skadubscribe.
Get a subscribe tree fragment.
That is the better pun there.
And ring the bell of awakening.
Yeah, ring the bell awakening. Share the locations of the subscribe tree in the
leave a message.
Section.
Yeah, leave a message for other players in the Abyssal Woods.
In the comment section.
There you go.
Yeah. All right, yeah, we're stopping the recording right now before it gets any worse.
Just a hard cut on around me just saying the day my butt went psycho.